Young Jewish activists are coming together in support of Israel as the war with Hamas has fueled mass misinformation and hate speech towards Jewish communities around the world. Now, my next guest is Eve Barlow. She's a Scottish Jewish journalist and activist based in Los Angeles. The self-described most trolled Jew on the internet fights anti-Semitism online and is here in Israel to spread awareness of the October 7th massacre. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Eve, you and several other celebrity activists, namely Michael Rappaport, Guy Nativ, you guys went down to southern Israel to witness with your own eyes the Gaza border communities, Kfar Aza, Nir Oz, Reim, that were the sites of some of the worst atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. Just an hour away from our studios here in Tel Aviv. Tell me a little bit about that experience and what that was like for you.
Yeah, you say it's just an hour away from here, and I think it's important for people who don't understand the lay of the land in Israel, how close everything is, and not even just geographically, but how connected everyone is in this country and how everything that happens here truly affects everyone. Being there was, it's so hard to put it into words. It's like landing in the center of the apocalypse. It's, you know, the concentration camps of the Holocaust were liberated by soldiers, but imagine if civilians like myself and the people that you met, the other influencers, you know, together with journalists from around the world, were able to go into this site, these sites, these places of horrific atrocities that you can't even imagine with your own brain. To go in there and smell the death and feel the magnitude of what happened there, and go into every single one of these houses, rows and rows and rows of houses where the most unreal things happened to peacenik communities of people who lived where they were living and were
people who were actual peace activists who wanted to find some sort of two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, who ended up being direct victims,
and they lived it with their whole lives. They built families there for generations. I met one survivor whose parents were founder of kibbutz Nir Oz, and she was born there. As the children of the kibbutzim, a few decades ago, she was raised in, a room where all the children were raised and slept separately from her parents, and was brought up in the kibbutznik lifestyle. It's not just about the fact that a lot of them were active fighters for peace and a two-state solution outwardly in political spheres. They were living it by example, and I think that's something that's really important to take away, the proximity of Gaza and the border to their homes. I was looking out of Yotam's bedroom in kibbutz Kfar Aza, one of the hostages who was tragically killed in an accident a couple of weeks ago in Gaza, and his bedroom window and the fence that borders Israel and Gaza couldn't have been. It was so close. It was insane to me. It was insane to me how much faith they had living in this place that they called 90% heaven and 10% hell because of the rocket fire that they would regularly experience. They really felt at home there, and they believed in coexistence. And these were the people who were the targets of not just murder, not just houses being burned down, but true acts of torture and barbarism and total desecration. I mean, their lives have been completely ripped apart beyond. It's beyond erasure. It's something else.
Eve, you recently published an essay about the Israel-Hamas war and the cynicism of liberal woke culture that we're seeing today in the West. You chose to call it biblical. Why is that?
It feels, I'm not a God-fearing person, and I'm not particularly religious, but there was something about actually bearing witness and being here and standing in the wreckage of what happened. It really brought home to me how ancient the hatred is, how barbaric these acts of violence were. It reminded me of the stories you read about in the Bible. It felt that way. It felt like it harkened back to millennia old hatred, a type of behavior in human beings who hate that you would think that thousands of years of human evolution and socializing and integrating would prevent people from having the capacity to achieve. The thing that I couldn't really wrap my head around was how it was humanly possible to commit these types of atrocities without feeling harmed oneself, and I witnessed to the October 7th 45-minute footage very early on in the war. I attended Gal Gadot's screening in LA at the Museum of Tolerance, and I remember being totally shocked and dismayed by the level of joy and exhilaration that Hamas was experiencing while carrying out these acts. And then to take the footage that I have seen and have become so familiar with and be standing in the places where all of this where all of this happened was a deeply profound experience. And so I likened it to biblical stories, because it feels that way to me. It feels ancient and like a repeated cycle of history. The anti-Semitism goes back thousands of years and has survived thousands of years because it has been institutionalized, and it continues to be so.
I want to bring into the conversation Jewish rapper Kosha DIllz. He joins us from New York, and armed with a camera and a microphone, he's gone to the streets of America to speak to these protesters who are demanding a ceasefire in Gaza, to reveal how little these young demonstrators know about the conflict they are protesting. Let's take a look.
Hamas, do you think they're a terror organization, or is it justified?
I see them more as freedom fighters than a terrorist organization.
Word. Are you mother?
Yes, I have a daughter.
You have a
daughter and 5 grandchildren.
Okay. So if they had 2 of your grandchildren and 1 of your daughters, what would you want them to do?
I would do everything possibly to have them back, yeah.
So if they stop firing, then... Do you guys think Hamas is a terrorist organization?
They are a political organization. Hamas es una organización de resistencia.
I don't believe so, no.
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
I love Hezbollah.
Should they take out Hamas?
Maybe, I don't know.
People's a lot of people to kill.
Of course. So it's 9,000 people.
You
They can't be
have the guts to do that, to kill the Aqaba.
I love your shirt first.
Thank you very much.
From the river to the sea, Palestine would be...
free.
What would happen to all the Israelis? When...
They would use their second citizenship to whatever country they immigrated from, and they would go back.
But not everyone in Israel has second citizenship.
I think if people picked up their phones and typed things into Google, we would have a different society. We'd have a much larger...
Thank you so much, dude. I appreciate it. Have a safe trip to Youngstown.
Bring the family home, we got the world saying, cry to death, they can't sleep, that's the worst pain. I remember.
Kosha, I want to ask you, first of all, how do you stay so cool in these protests? Because just watching this makes my blood boil.
I think once you have the experience of being a rejected musician, I think you could really much do everything. I do truly believe that everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. So when you go in with that attitude, I think you kind of level the playing field a little bit more.
I want to discuss with both you and both of you here with me today. I want to discuss with both of you the wider phenomenon of these TikTok-educated Gen Zers. These demonstrators, like we just saw, are very young. We can see that blonde little girl, we'll call her Haley, shockingly ignorant and misinformed. They clearly know nothing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They deny Hamas are terrorists. They call for Israel's Jewish population to be expelled and go back to the original countries that they came from, not understanding that 60% of Israelis come from Middle Eastern and North African countries. In your eyes, what's the biggest misconception, and how do you fight this misinformation that is coming at these young generations from every single source of social media?
I think it's a great question. I think there's many different ways to do it. I think everyone sort of plays their part. I do want to say that, everyone, and I mean everyone, has a heart, and everyone, including us specifically, people are under the misconception that Jewish people don't cry when we see kids that are injured and dying. So it really takes time. I mean, if you respond back to people on Instagram or any other social media platform, there's going to be a moment where people say, "Oh wow, I didn't know you thought that," and that's the issue, is that it's been drained into each other's heads, that we're not able to have conversations and we only see videos. So the fact that none of us are communicating, even the friends that aren't saying anything or are saying something, that's part of the issue. So every day I try to practice having communication with people that I would never speak with, and the message starts out as "screw you, f you, your mother," and I'm trying to make new content out of that. I mean, and that's through online. And the easiest thing for me is just to go out there. And I think that's not for everybody, but if it helps other people get a little bit of a voice, that's important too.
You say that it's easy, and since October 7th, you fought to bring a sane Jewish voice to these anti-Israel protests. But I want to ask you, why do you take it upon yourself to go out to these rallies and put yourself at risk, a real risk of being a target?
I don't think I'm at risk, because I think I'm capable. Like I said, I've been rejected in so many forms of my career as an artist and entertainer that it's not abnormal for me to have very abrasive, short, unpleasant conversations with people. I'm just switching the position. And this is something I actually dearly care about. I'm Israeli. My family's from Kiryat Tivon. I grew up as the first person born in America. My whole life and my whole career, I've noticed that people along the way didn't work with me because I was Israeli. Even if they were Jewish or they felt it was too Israeli during some sort of a conflict, that would put them at risk for working with me. And I said, you know what, now's the time, if there's any time, to be more Jewish and to go out there and be the regular voice. And I thought I could do it in a certain way that incorporated my comedy, my advocacy, and just me being myself. I mean, my name's Rami. It's also an Israeli name, and it's a Palestinian name. It's a Lebanese name. It's an Egyptian name. And I think that is important, to go out there. And in today's world of how the world thinks of things, that is an equal playing field. Absolutely. More than someone named David, you know what I mean? Or Jonathan. They're like, "Oh, Rami, you're like me," So.
Yeah. Kosha DIllz, you recently released 2 songs that deal directly with the war in Israel. I want to take a listen to Bring the Family Home.
Bring the family home, we got the world saying, cry to death, I can't sleep, that's the worst pain. I remember tonight, the night the world changed, the line just roared, y'all heard me. Bring the family home, we got the world saying, cry to death, I can't sleep, that's the worst pain. I remember tonight, the night the world changed, the line just roared, y'all can't hurt me.
And Kosha, you were recently in Israel. You performed for IDF troops. I want to get a little bit a taste of that experience, how that was like for you, and what have been the reactions in Israel here, and how they've been different compared to the United States, to your music, to who you are.
I would say, in the U.S. people appreciate me. There's definitely a huge divide, I would say, and I don't mean this in a negative way. Maybe I should reuse that. The connection is a little bit off between American Jews and Israelis. When we go to Israel, it's very hard, obviously, for American culture, especially like on a Jewish connotation, to get into like the Israeli hip hop scene. In this specific way, these videos that I've been doing in the streets seem to connect with the Israeli population. Like I just did stuff with Gal Galatz, and a lot of other Israeli news places had interviewed me. Being able to play for troops, being able to play a show at Kuli Alma, being able to just be outside in Israel and people come up to me and really, them not understanding what's happening in America with anti-Semitic culture versus the creative response in art that's happening in Israel, I would say is much better. And they're having a really tough time grasping, these rallies that occur, because I would say if you're in Tel Aviv, it's really a liberal city.
Absolutely, and the creative response to the collective trauma we're seeing is very ingenuous. Kosha DIllz, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks.
Eve Barlow is still with me here in studio. We just spoke to Kosha DIllz, who spoke about that feeling of kind of being singled out in the music industry anytime that there was any sort of conflict in the region here that involved Israel. You are also a journalist. You also used to be a music journalist, and you, from what I understand, have also experienced that feeling of being singled out.
Yeah, I have. It's so interesting that Rami and I met over 10 years ago and have kind of checked in with each other at points over time when we've both experienced this isolation. But for me, it happened, it was less of a slow-moving bullet and more of something that exploded online all at once. I have always been a proud Jew, and I always talked about my relationship to my Zionism, and I've never shied away from being open about visiting Israel and, trying to incorporate it somewhat in my music reporting. I actually came out here to tune in Tel Aviv at the height of my career in music journalism, and nobody was that upset about it. But the second I started to fight anti-Semitism tooth and nail, and I stood up with a bunch of British Jews against Jeremy Corbyn, that was a bit of a moment for the music community that I came from, who were on the opposite side of the fence. I did it in the same way as Kosha does it. He wants to try and bridge a gap and try and have a conversation with a captivated audience that you have in your hands, and you have to trust that other people have hearts, and maybe if you get the right angle and try the conversation from the right approach, you can appeal to that. You can appeal to their critical thinking. So I was doing a lot of that work for a while, but I also wasn't scared to vehemently call out anti-Jewish racism when I saw it, and even when it was coming from the least convenient of places, the most popular new ideologies or the most popular woke causes. And my story is that in 2020, after the death of George Floyd, I was witnessing protests against anti-black racism on the streets of America. I was completely empathetic to people fighting anti-black racism in America. It's a problem. It exists. I'm not going to deny it. But I noticed... Do
you think that people who have showed up for all the other movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter, Me Too, have showed up for Jews in this moment, specifically the women who have been targeted by sexual violence?
Absolutely not. They have not shown up, and it is deplorable. I've run out of words to describe how I feel about it. As a feminist who stood strong in those movements, who did a lot of work around those movements, continues to advocate. I'm a woman and a feminist. I continue to advocate against patriarchy, against misogyny. The double standard is inexcusable. And it's not just that it's inexcusable, it's toxifying and poisoning the movement against itself. If you can't acknowledge the atrocities against women and children on October 7th, then in my opinion, you're not a feminist that can be trusted. This is a deep-seated hatred and toxicity that exists in the movement that will ruin the movement. Truly, it's inexcusable. And my constant campaigning against anti-Semitism and against anti-Israel sentiment has made me somewhat of a social pariah in these circles, but I continue to be as committed to my fight for all of these progressive causes as I am against anti-Semitism. It's just that my Jewishness is the aspect of me that seems to be the most targeted, and when I fight back against that specific aspect, I'm the most silenced and the least supported by my fellow activists in many other progressive issues. So I've been doing the work too of calling out the hypocrisy and the double standard, because it's not something I take personally. It affects all of us Jews and all Israelis here in Israel, and it will eventually have a ripple effect on the wider world, because, as I say, it's harmful to these own individual movements that they can't recognize the hypocrisy.
Absolutely. Eve Barlow, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.